The lobby of Wardcore Biotech gleamed like a palace carved from marble and glass. Every surface shone under the harsh white lights. Every step echoed like a whisper of power. It was the kind of place where silence carried weight, where order was as polished as the floors themselves. Yet on that afternoon, all of it shattered. "Ma'am, step back! That little girl might bite!" The security guard's voice sliced through the air like a whip. His words snapped against the walls, startling the hush into a cold, collective gasp. On the floor, a small figure shook as if the world around her was collapsing. Eva. Her pale blonde hair clung damp to her forehead, her arms wrapped tight around her knees. She rocked back and forth, lips pressed together, releasing a strange humming sound that trembled in the air, uneven, desperate, like the breaking strings of a violin. Her fingers tapped against the marble, a rhythm only she understood, frantic and relentless. Employees froze in place. Men in suits, women with clipboards, every one of them turned into statues, their fear and pity tangled together. Not a soul dared to move. Their eyes flicked to the elevators, waiting for the girl's nanny, waiting for someone with authority to fix the chaos. But the nanny wasn't there, and the child's storm was growing. At the far end of the lobby, gripping the handle of a mop, stood Kesha Hayes. Her chest tightened as she watched the girl unravel. Kesha had spent years cleaning these walls, quietly fading into the background, invisible to everyone who walked past her. But as she stood there now, she felt every fiber of her being pulled toward the trembling child on the floor. The guard's bark echoed again. "Don't you dare. Keep away from Miss Ward's daughter. Anyone who tries will regret it." Kesha's heart pounded. She wasn't a specialist. She wasn't a doctor. She wasn't anyone important in this building of glass and steel. She was just a janitor, a single mother who scraped together enough to keep her little girl fed and safe. But as she watched Eva curl tighter into herself, Kesha wasn't thinking about her job or the rules. She was thinking about Becca, her own daughter, and what she would need if the world ever turned too heavy for her small shoulders. The lobby felt frozen in time, all eyes locked on the fragile child when Kesha made her choice. She set her mop against the wall, her movements slow, deliberate. Ignoring the guard's furious glare, she walked forward, each step echoing across the cold marble. A few employees gasped softly, as if they had just seen someone walk toward fire. Ava's humming grew louder, her rocking sharper, as if warning Kesha away. But Kesha didn't stop. She lowered herself to the floor, not too close, but near enough that the girl could see she wasn't alone. She reached into her cleaning cart, pulled out a bottle of dish soap, and dipped her fingertip into the water. Then, with the gentlest breath, she blew. A single bubble floated upward, then another, then more. Delicate spheres glistening with pale blue and violet light, drifting into the sterile air. The lobby held its breath. Eva's trembling slowed, her wide, frightened eyes fixed on the bubbles, tracking them as they rose and popped in the air above her head. She blinked once, then twice, her humming softening into silence. For the first time in what felt like forever, the storm in her tiny body eased. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the faint pop of bubbles breaking against the air. And in that fragile silence, Kesha knew she had reached her. Far above, on the top floor, a tall man stood by the glass, his sharp eyes narrowed. Marcus Ward, billionaire CEO of Wardcore, the man known for never flinching, never pausing, never bending. Yet at that moment, his world tilted. Dozens of experts had failed to soothe Eva. Therapists, specialists, highly paid professionals with endless credentials. None of them had succeeded. And now, a cleaning woman, blowing soap bubbles with wet fingertips, had done the impossible. Marcus pressed a hand to his chest, not out of pain, but out of something he hadn't felt in years. A stirring, a crack in the armor he had built around his heart. Below, the woman kept blowing bubbles with steady breaths, her face calm, her eyes filled with quiet compassion. In the marble silence of Wardcore Biotech, something extraordinary had just begun, and Marcus Ward, for the first time in his life, felt powerless, not from failure, but from the terrifying realization that this ordinary woman had reached his daughter in ways he never could. And he could not look away. The marble lobby eventually regained its rhythm, whispers rising like restless winds as the tension eased. But for Marcus Ward, watching from the glass walls of his top-floor office, the world hadn't simply calmed. It had shifted. He stood rooted in place, his reflection cast against the city skyline. A woman he'd never noticed before had succeeded where the best doctors in the country had failed. It unsettled him in ways he didn't dare admit aloud. He tugged at his tie, though it was already perfectly straight. "Postpone the meeting," he said without turning, his tone low, steady. His assistant blinked at him in confusion. Marcus Ward never postponed meetings. Find out who she is. Now. The words dropped with the weight of a command that allowed no argument. Downstairs, Kesha wiped her damp hands on a rag, then quietly returned to her mop. She tried to act as though nothing had happened, though her heart was still pounding. She had seen Eva's eyes soften, her little body relax, if only for a moment. That was enough for her. She never thought anyone would care about what she'd done. She certainly never imagined the man on the top floor was watching. Minutes later, as she pushed her car toward the service elevator, a suited woman intercepted her. "Miss Hayes?" The voice was crisp, professional, edged with something Kesha couldn't place. She nodded hesitantly. "Mr. Ward would like to see you. Now." Kesha's breath caught. She thought she had misheard. "Me, I'm just, you, now," the woman repeated firmly, gesturing toward the executive elevator. The golden doors, usually reserved for board members and top executives, gleamed like judgment. Kesha's legs felt heavy as she stepped inside. The elevator began its smooth ascent, her reflection trembling in the mirrored walls. She thought of Becca at school, of the rent that was due, of the fragile life she was holding together one paycheck at a time. What if she'd crossed a line? What if blowing bubbles had cost her the job that kept food on the table? When the doors opened, the air itself felt different. The top floor was another world, cold steel and endless glass, a panorama of the city stretching out beneath the sky. It was breathtaking and suffocating all at once. At the far end of the room, by the massive window, stood Marcus Ward. He didn't turn right away. His tall frame was rigid, hands clasped behind his back, as though he had been carved from stone. Finally, he pivoted, and his eyes locked on her, piercing, analytical, and cold. Yet behind the frost was something else, something unsettled. "Please, have a seat." His voice was smooth, controlled, the kind that carried across boardrooms and silenced entire negotiations. Kesha sat carefully in the leather chair across from his desk, her hands folded in her lap, but her gaze didn't waver. She had faced harsher stares before in her life. She wouldn't shrink now. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his jaw tight. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Kesha drew in a steady breath. Her voice was quiet, but firm. "I did what anyone should have do. And then, Mr. Ward, I tried to help a child." "Anyone?" His brow furrowed. "You're not one of my experts. You're not trained. What gave you the right to approach my daughter when every specialist I've hired has failed?" His words were clipped, sharp, each syllable designed to pierce. Her back straightened. "I didn't need a right. I'm a mother. I know what children need when they're hurting. Sometimes it isn't expertise or strategy, it's sincerity." For the first time in years, Marcus's confidence faltered. Sincerity. He rolled the word on his tongue as though it were foreign. He searched her face, but there was no hesitation there. No fear of his title, his wealth, or his power. "You expect me to believe you did this out of, what, compassion?" "Yes," she said simply. Her voice didn't shake. "I don't want your money. I clean floors to raise my daughter. I would never exploit a child. Not yours, not anyone's." The silence between them grew heavy, taut like a rope pulled to breaking point. Marcus pressed his palms to the desk, trying to anchor himself. He had stared down billion-dollar deals, ruthless competitors, and hostile shareholders. Yet this woman's calm honesty was harder to confront than any of them. "Eva is fragile," he admitted at last, his voice softening against his will. "I can't bear to see her hurt again." Kesha's eyes warmed, though her tone remained steady. "She isn't fragile, Mr. Ward. She's sensitive. There's a difference. She doesn't need to be fixed. She needs to be understood." Something in Marcus's chest tightened. He had never heard anyone speak about his daughter that way. Not even himself. Kesha rose slowly, meeting his gaze one last time. "If you want me to stop, I will. But if you truly care about Eva, let her have a chance at something real. Because money can't buy her trust. Only love can." She turned and walked toward the door, her steps echoing through the vast, sterile office. Marcus didn't stop her, but his eyes followed her every movement until the door clicked shut. Alone, he turned back to the window, the city sprawling endlessly below. For the first time in his life, he felt his empire trembling, not from outside threats, but from a single mother who had dared to sit on his floor and blow soap bubbles. And Marcus Ward knew deep down that nothing about his life, or Eva's, would ever be the same again. The next afternoon, Kesha tried to lose herself in her routine. Her mop slid across the marble floors, the faint scent of disinfectant rising with every stroke. Yet no matter how hard she tried, her mind kept drifting back to the CEO's piercing eyes, the weight of his questions, the strange flicker of vulnerability that had appeared, just for a heartbeat, in his voice. She told herself it was over, that she had overstepped and would probably be dismissed soon. But that evening, when she clocked out, a sealed envelope awaited her at the security desk. "Miss Hayes," the guard muttered, sliding it across the counter with a frown. "You're to report to Mr. Ward's residence tomorrow, 10 a.m. sharp." Her breath caught. His residence. Not the office. Not another interrogation. Something deeper. She tucked the envelope under her arm, her pulse racing. All night she sat at the edge of her bed, Becca curled beside her, thinking of what it could mean. The next morning she dressed Becca in her best clothes, simple jeans, a yellow sweater, and the little pouch of colored pencils she carried everywhere. Kesha's heart thudded as they rode the sleek elevator up to Marcus Ward's penthouse, rising higher and higher until the city looked like a toy below. When the doors opened, a hush swept over them. The penthouse stretched like a palace of glass and steel, cold and immaculate, with gleaming floors and walls so white they seemed almost sterile. Not a toy in sight, not a sign of a child's life. The silence was suffocating. Marcus stood waiting, his figure framed by the vast window, the city sprawling behind him. His presence filled the room, tall and unyielding, his expression unreadable. Yet when his gaze fell on Becca, small, curious, clutching her colored pencils like treasure, something in his eyes softened, just slightly. "Thank you for coming, Miss Hayes," he said curtly. He turned on his heel without another word. "Eva is in her room. Follow me." The hallway was long, lined with abstract paintings that seemed more like investments than art. Every step echoed, reminding Kesha of the gulf between their worlds. When Marcus stopped at a heavy door and pushed it open, Kesha's breath caught. Eva sat by the window, knees drawn to her chest, staring at the skyline as if searching for escape. She didn't turn when the door opened. She didn't even blink. "I've tried everything," Marcus admitted, his voice low, almost ashamed. "She refuses to speak. Experts say she has a severe emotional processing disorder. Do you really think you can do anything?" Kesha didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on Eva. "I'm not here to change her. I'll sit with her, listen, and wait. If you want miracles in an hour, you'll be disappointed." Marcus frowned, retreating to the corner of the room, arms crossed. His sharp eyes stayed fixed on her, as if waiting for proof she would fail. Kesha lowered herself onto the carpet, not too close, not too far. She opened her bag and pulled out a simple sketch pad. Without a word, she laid it on the floor. Becca, quiet as a shadow, sat beside her mother and carefully pulled out her colored pencils. She began to draw, bright shapes, messy lines, colors blooming on the blank page. For a long while, Eva stayed still, her face unreadable. Then, faintly, came the sound of fabric rustling. She was looking, her eyes, wide and cautious, fixed on the page as Becca's crayons whispered across the paper. Kesha slid the pad and pencil box an inch closer, a silent invitation. No words, no pressure. A minute passed, then another. Slowly, like a bird testing new wings, Eva crawled across the carpet. She picked up a blue pencil with trembling fingers and pressed it to the page. Small circles bloomed, shaky, uneven, but hers. Her lips parted, and a tiny sound slipped out, almost a laugh, when the colors filled the page. Marcus's chest tightened. His daughter, who had lived inside walls of silence for so long, was reaching out, not to him, to this woman and her child. Jealousy twisted in his gut, sharp and unexpected, but underneath it was something even more painful, relief. For nearly an hour, the three of them sat together, drawing. Shapes turned into figures, figures turned into something more, and then Eva did something that left the room breathless. She held up the paper, a family sketch, 3 figures holding hands beneath a sky filled with pale blue bubbles. Marcus's throat constricted, his carefully built world of power and glass shattered around him. He had bought the best doctors, the finest therapies, but none had given him this, a moment of trust, fragile and luminous, captured in a child's uneven pencil lines. Kesha looked at him then, her gaze steady, her voice soft but unshakable. "Mr. Ward, this is what she needs. Not money, not cold walls, a family, warmth." Marcus said nothing. His face was stone, but his eyes betrayed him, flickering with pain, envy, and something dangerously close to hope. He turned abruptly and left the room, as if fleeing from a truth he wasn't ready to face. But before the door closed, he glanced back. Eva was still there, leaning against Kesha, her small hand clutching the blue pencil. And Marcus Ward realized, with a kind of terror he had never felt in boardrooms or hostile takeovers, that his daughter was slipping away from him and being saved by a stranger. The city was wrapped in the deep glow of evening when Marcus Ward sat alone in his penthouse office, staring at the fragile sketch Eva had made. The paper trembled between his fingers. The 3 figures, himself, Eva, and Kesha, stood beneath a sky alive with blue bubbles. The drawing was childlike, uneven, but to Marcus it was devastating. It wasn't just a picture, it was a message, a cry from a little girl who wanted connection, not treatment. He rubbed his temples, trying to silence the war in his head. All his life, he'd controlled outcomes. Deals, mergers, negotiations, everything bent to his will. But this picture showed him a truth he could no longer ignore. His daughter needed something he had never given her: warmth, presence, love. And that truth cut deeper than any loss of reputation or power. But not everyone was moved. The next morning, as Marcus strode into the Wardcore boardroom, tension hit him like a wall. The directors sat rigidly, faces carved in disapproval. At the far end, Greg Stanton, sharp-eyed, perfectly groomed, leaned back in his chair, the picture of self-satisfaction. "Marcus," Greg began, his voice edged with ice, "we need to discuss yesterday's scene." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Go on." Greg tapped a folder against the table, the sound snapping through the silence. "The lobby incident is already all over social media. Photos of a cleaning woman sitting on the marble floor with your daughter. The press is asking why one of the most powerful CEOs in the country has entrusted his child to a janitor. Do you understand the risk you've created?" Marcus's fingers curled into fists on the table, but his voice stayed calm. "Her name is Kesha Hayes, and she's the first person who has ever reached Eva. That's what matters." Greg's laugh was soft but dripping with disdain. "Effective? Marcus, she blew soap bubbles. And now you want us to believe? Eve, she's the answer. Shareholders don't care about sincerity. They care about stability, about optics. If this story spreads further, our stock will bleed out before the quarter ends." The words rippled around the table, directors nodding grimly. Marcus felt their eyes piercing him, not with curiosity, but judgment. For the first time in years, they weren't looking at him as their fearless leader. They were looking at him as a liability. "Marcus," one director added quietly, "you've always been brilliant at keeping personal matters out of public sight. Why jeopardize it now?" Because for the first time he thought, "This isn't about me." He leaned forward, his voice steady, though fire burned beneath it. "You all see numbers, headlines, and stock prices. But I see my daughter. A child slipping further into herself until a janitor cared enough to sit on the floor and meet her where she was. If that doesn't matter, then what are we even fighting for in this company?" The room stiffened, the director shifting uncomfortably. But Greg stood, seizing the moment. "Marcus, with respect, that's emotional nonsense. You're allowing sentiment to cloud your judgment. If you don't act now, terminate her, issue a public apology, this company's reputation will be destroyed. You'll lose everything." Marcus's heart hammered. He could feel the weight of their stares pressing him down, the cold machinery of corporate power grinding around him. For a moment, the thought of firing Kesha almost clawed its way past his lips. It would be easier, cleaner. The shareholders would be satisfied, the media silenced. But then he saw Eva's small hands clutching that blue pencil. He saw her eyes soften for the first time in years. He heard Kesha's steady voice. "She doesn't need to be fixed. She needs to be understood." Marcus pushed back his chair and stood, his gaze locked on Greg. "I will not fire her. Not now, not ever." His voice was low but filled with steel. "If you can't stomach sincerity, then maybe it's not me who doesn't belong here." Gasps rippled across the table. Greg's smirk faltered, replaced with a simmering rage. "Careful, Marcus," he hissed. "If you make this your hill to die on, I promise the board won't hesitate to bury you on it." Marcus didn't flinch. He turned and left the room, his footsteps echoing like gunfire down the marble corridor. He knew a storm was coming, but for the first time in his life he was ready to face it, not as a CEO protecting a company, but as a father fighting for his daughter. Back in the penthouse that evening, Marcus pushed open Eva's door quietly. Kesha sat on the floor again, Becca by her side. The three of them were bent over the sketchpad, blue pencil in Eva's tiny hand. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, his chest tightening as he watched. Jealousy flickered inside him again, sharp, painful, but it was drowned by something far greater. Hope. He had risked his empire, and somehow, it felt like the first decision in his life that was truly right. The storm broke faster than Marcus had expected. By morning, the headlines screamed in merciless fonts. Billionaire CEO's daughter entrusted to janitor, reckless negligence or hidden scandal. Grainy paparazzi shots of Kesha kneeling in the marble lobby, Eva watching soap bubbles with wide eyes, were plastered across every screen. What Marcus had seen as a miracle of connection, the media twisted into a spectacle. Inside Wardcore's glass tower, the boardroom was suffocating with tension. Greg Stanton stood at the center, his voice sharp as steel. This is exactly what I warned you about, he snapped, slapping a stack of newspapers onto the polished table. You've jeopardized this company's reputation, Marcus. The stock has dropped 8% overnight. Shareholders are calling for answers. The directors shifted uncomfortably, their faces pale under the fluorescent lights. Marcus sat at the head of the TA. BLE, shoulders squared, his gaze fixed on Greg. He had spent years mastering the art of calm, but beneath his composure, fury simmered like molten stone. What do you propose, Greg? He asked evenly. Greg didn't miss a beat. It's simple. Cut ties. Suspend Miss Hayes immediately. Issue a statement clarifying that she had no authorization to interact with your daughter. We call it a mistake and we move on. Anything else is suicide. Marcus's pulse thundered in his ears. The thought of severing Kesha from Eva felt like betrayal. He remembered Eva's small hand wrapped around that blue pencil, the sketch of a family beneath soap bubbles. But around him, the board's cold stares pressed closer, suffocating him with their unspoken demand. Marcus, another director added softly, you've built this company on discipline and image. Don't throw it all away for sentiment. He looked down at his hands, at the faint tremor in them. He wanted to roar that his daughter was more important than their profits, but the weight of their expectation bore down like iron chains. He closed his eyes briefly, hearing Eva's soft laugh in his memory, and then opened them with grim resolve. Effective immediately, he said, his voice low and heavy. Miss Hayes will be suspended from her duties. But hear me clearly. There will be no public humiliation, no slander. She is not to be harmed. Greg's lips curved into a thin, satisfied smile. Excellent. At least you've come to your senses. But as the board dissolved into murmurs of relief, Marcus felt no victory. His chest ached as though he had just betrayed someone far braver than himself. That afternoon, a cold envelope arrived at Kesha's modest apartment. The words inside were blunt and merciless. You are suspended from duty and barred from the premises until further notice. Kesha read it twice, her stomach sinking. Not for herself. She had cleaned floors long enough to survive job loss. But for Eva, that fragile little girl who had just begun to reach out, just begun to smile again. Tears pricked her eyes as she pictured Eva retreating into silence, the bright blue pencil falling from her small fingers. And Kesha was right. At the penthouse, Eva sat on the floor of her vast empty room, her sketchpad untouched. The colored pencils lay scattered, ignored. She refused food, refused to speak, her eyes vacant as if she were drifting further and further into a world no one could follow. Marcus watched helplessly from the doorway, agony twisting inside him. He had thought suspending Kesha would protect his empire, shield Eva from scandal. Instead, he had ripped away the only lifeline his daughter had ever grasped. Every time he tried to approach, Eva turned her face away, retreating deeper into her shell. Late that night, unable to bear the silence, Marcus drove aimlessly until he found himself parked outside Kesha's apartment. The dim yellow light spilling through the curtains cast a warm glow against the dark street. He sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, his chest heavy with guilt. He wanted to knock, to apologize, to beg her to come back. But pride, his oldest companion, held him frozen. After a long, tortured moment, he started the engine and drove away into the dark. Yet even as he left, he knew the truth he could no longer run from. He had betrayed his daughter. He had betrayed Kesha. And unless he found the courage to stand against Greg and the world itself, he would lose them both forever. The night pressed heavy on the city, its lights glowing like restless eyes against the darkness. Marcus Ward sat in his car, engine idling quietly outside the modest apartment complex where Kesha Hayes lived. The gleaming towers of his empire loomed far behind him, distant and irrelevant. Here, the streets were cracked, the walls weathered, the air tinged with the smell of fried food from a corner shop. This was not his world, yet tonight he belonged nowhere else. He stared at the faint yellow glow spilling from Kesha's window. His hand hovered on the door handle, trembling in a way that unsettled him. He had faced down ruthless investors, cutthroat rivals, entire governments, never once faltering. But now, standing at the edge of this simple doorway, he was stripped bare of his armor. Finally, he forced himself to move. His shoes echoed against the concrete walkway as he crossed the narrow hall. He raised his hand and knocked, each rap of his knuckles loud in the silence. For a moment, he almost hoped she wouldn't answer, but the door creaked open, and there she was, Kesha, her face framed in the dim light, eyes guarded, weary, but unflinching. "Mr. Ward," she said, her voice cool, the warmth she once showed him buried under hurt. "What are you doing here?" Marcus swallowed hard, his throat felt dry. "I know I'm the last person you want to see right now," he admitted, his voice lower than it had ever been. But I had no other choice. Eva, she's falling apart without you. Kesha's lips tightened. Pain flickered in her eyes, though her tone stayed steady. I warned you. I told you what she needed, and you chose your reputation instead. She opened the door only a little wider, enough for her words to cut through. Now you come here, expecting what? For me to fix the damage? Her words hit harder than any accusation Marcus had ever faced. He looked down, ashamed, before forcing himself to meet her eyes. I was wrong. Completely wrong. I thought protecting the company would protect Eva too. But I was blind. I failed her. His voice cracked, unsteady. I failed you. Kesha's grip on the door tightened. She studied him, searching for the arrogance she had grown used to seeing, but instead she saw something unfamiliar in his eyes. Humility. Fear. The kind of raw honesty only a broken man could hold. You need my help? She asked softly, though her voice carried a sharp edge. Or do you just want me to clean up your image again? No, Marcus said quickly, shaking his head. This has nothing to do with the press or the board or shareholders. I don't care about any of that anymore. I came here because of Eva, and because of me. You're the only one who understands her, the only one brave enough to tell me where I'm failing. He paused, his voice breaking. I don't know how to be a father, Kesha. I never did. I don't know how to love her the way she needs. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the faint hum of the city outside. For the first time, Kesha saw through the layers of wealth and power to the man beneath. Flawed, vulnerable, aching for something he couldn't buy. Her heart stirred, though the sting of betrayal still lingered. Marcus, she said quietly, Eva doesn't just need me. She needs you. She needs a father who will listen, who will love her without conditions. If you keep hiding behind your pride, nothing I do will matter. Marcus nodded slowly, every word sinking into him like a knife that carved away the man he used to be. He drew in a trembling breath. Then teach me. Teach me how to be the father she deserves. I'll change, Kesha. I swear I will. She studied him for a long moment. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, though the road ahead would be anything but easy. Her own walls cracked, just slightly, and she exhaled. If I come back, she said at last, her tone firm, you must promise me something. Eva comes before everything else, your company, your image, your pride. You step into her world, not force her into yours. Can you do that? Marcus's answer was immediate, his voice steady with newfound conviction. Yes, I promise. I'll put her above it all, whatever it takes. Kesha's expression softened, though her eyes still glistened with caution. Slowly, she opened the door wider. Then come in, she said quietly. We have a lot to figure out, and this time, you can't fail. Marcus stepped inside her modest apartment, the warm air wrapping around him like an embrace he hadn't known he needed. The space was small, worn, but alive in a way his penthouse had never been. It smelled faintly of soap and cooked rice. On the table lay Becca's open sketchbook, filled with bright, clumsy drawings of suns and smiling faces. For the first time in his life, Marcus felt a different kind of wealth, the kind that came not from power or prestige, but from presence. He sat at the little table opposite Kesha, his chest heavy with both regret and hope. Outside, the night slowly yielded to dawn, pale light breaking through the blinds. It felt like more than just morning. It felt like the beginning of something entirely new. The first fragile days of Marcus's new promise passed with an uneasy calm. He spent more hours at Kesha's apartment than in his office, learning, awkwardly at first, how to sit on the floor beside Eva, how to listen instead of command, how to let silence be enough. Kesha guided him with patient firmness, showing him the small things that mattered. The way Eva responded when he let her choose the crayon, the way her shoulders eased when he stopped asking questions and simply drew beside her. Slowly, he felt his daughter's wall begin to crack. Slowly, for the first time, he began to feel like a father. But peace is fragile, and it never lasts long in the world. Marcus lived in. It was a gray morning when his phone buzzed with a call from his attorney, Jay. Ms. Wilson. The man's voice was tight, urgent. Marcus, we've got a problem. Spencer's back. The name struck Marcus like a blade. Spencer Ward, his half-brother, his rival in blood and business. The man who had disappeared years ago, leaving Eva's mother behind, abandoning his responsibilities without a glance back. Marcus hadn't spoken his name in years. What do you mean he's back? Marcus asked, his voice clipped, a muscle ticking in his jaw. James hesitated, then delivered the blow. He's filed a petition with the court to regain custody of Eva. Marcus's chest tightened, his breath catching. That's absurd. He walked away when she was a toddler. He never cared. I know, James said gravely, But he's leveraging the recent scandal, the photos, the headlines, CEO entrusts daughter to janitor. He's claiming you're unfit, that you put Eva in the care of someone unqualified. And public sentiment, it's shifting. He has allies, Marcus, money, connections. He's prepared to fight dirty. The line went quiet for a moment. Marcus's reflection stared back at him from the glass window of his office, his face pale and tense. He could hear Eva's soft laughter from the other room, Kesha's calm voice guiding her through a drawing exercise. The thought of Spencer taking that away twisted his stomach with dread. He hung up and walked into the living room, his expression heavy with turmoil. Kesha glanced up, immediately sensing something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked softly, placing a steady hand on Eva's shoulder. Marcus struggled to keep his voice even. "Spencer, he's back. He's trying to take her." Kesha's eyes widened, anger flashing in them. He abandoned her. How could he even dare? "Because hatred runs deep in him," Marcus replied bitterly. "When our father left the company to me, Spencer swore I had stolen everything from him. He's waited for a moment like this. Now he thinks he's found it." Kesha rose slowly, her hand resting firmly on the towel. BLE, her gaze burning with determination. "Eva isn't a pawn. She isn't a tool for his revenge. We won't let him win." Marcus studied her face, so steady, so resolute. For the first time, he realized he wasn't standing alone. Kesha was beside him, her strength like a shield he'd never known he needed. In the days that followed, Spencer unleashed a storm. His lawyers fed the press a constant drip of venom. Marcus was irresponsible, blinded by emotion, compromised by a woman with no credentials. Articles painted Kesha as a manipulative outsider, exploiting Eva for personal gain. Social media erupted with judgment, strangers debating Eva's life as though she were a headline and not a child. Marcus's empire shook. Shareholders panicked. The board whispered about Spencer's return, some even hinting that he would be a safer guardian for the Ward family legacy. The city, once cowed by Marcus's power, now waited eagerly for his downfall. But in their small apartment, Marcus, Kesha, and Eva formed a fragile fortress. They sat together each night, Eva clutching her sketchbook, Becca adding bright colors to every page, Kesha's steady presence holding them together. And Marcus, once consumed by pride, learned what it meant to draw strength not from power, but from family. Still, as the court date drew near, he knew the battle ahead would be unlike anything he had faced. Spencer wasn't coming for money, he was coming for vengeance. And Eva, sweet, fragile Eva, was at the very center of the storm. One evening, as Marcus tucked a blanket around his daughter, he whispered to himself words he had never dared to say before. "I will not let you down again." Kesha heard him, her voice gentle but firm as she stood in the doorway. "Then tomorrow, we fight. Together." And Marcus, meeting her steady gaze, felt a strange, powerful certainty take root inside him. For the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of losing everything, because he had finally discovered what everything truly meant. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and tension. Reporters swarmed the steps outside, their cameras flashing like lightning in a storm. Headlines were already circling. Ward v. Ward. Custody showdown for Billionaire's daughter. Inside, the air was thick with whispers, the benches packed with spectators eager to witness the spectacle of the city's most powerful family tearing itself apart. Marcus Ward walked into the courtroom with his jaw tight, his hand resting lightly on Eva's shoulder. She leaned against him, small and pale, clutching her sketchbook like a lifeline. Kesha followed close behind, her presence a quiet pillar of strength. Though she wore no suit, no power badge of wealth, her steady eyes and calm dignity made her stand taller than anyone else in the room. Across the aisle, Spencer Ward sat with a smug grin, his lawyer Jonathan Reeves by his side. Spencer looked immaculate in his tailored suit, but beneath the polish, his eyes glinted with malice. He had waited years for this moment, and now he was ready to strike. "All rise," the bailiff called. Judge Meredith Collins, stern and sharp-eyed, took her seat at the bench. Her gaze swept the room like a blade. "Be seated. We are here to hear the petition of Spencer Ward regarding custody of minor child Eva Ward." Jonathan Reeves was the first to rise. His voice was smooth, dripping with feigned concern. "Your Honor, this case is simple. Marcus Ward, though a capable businessman, has shown grave negligence as a father. He entrusted his daughter's fragile mental health to an unqualified cleaning woman. This isn't rumor, it's fact, documented by photographs and media coverage. Miss Hayes, a janitor, was permitted unsupervised access to a vulnerable child. This is not love, it is recklessness." Gasps rippled through the courtroom as Jonathan clicked a remote. Photos flashed onto a screen. Kesha, kneeling. On the marble floor, blowing soap bubbles toward Eva, Marcus standing in the background. Another showed Kesha and Eva bent over a sketchpad together. Jonathan spun them into a tale of irresponsibility, exploitation, even danger. Spencer sat back, smirking, as Jonathan concluded with a flourish. This is not about wealth, Your Honor. This is about the well-being of a child. And we argue that Marcus Ward has failed in his duties. Eva deserves a stable guardian, my client, her biological father, who is ready to step up now where Marcus has fallen short. The words hit Marcus like knives. He gripped the table, his knuckles white. But when James Wilson, his attorney, rose, Marcus saw the fire in his friend's eyes. Your Honor, James began, his voice firm, we do not deny that Miss Hayes is a janitor. We do not deny that she is not a licensed therapist. But let's talk about what we cannot deny. He gestured toward Eva. We cannot deny the progress this little girl has made under Miss Hayes' care. We cannot deny the first smile she has shown in years. We cannot deny the simple truth that when every expert failed, a woman with nothing but sincerity and love reached her. James laid out evidence. Eva's drawings, notes of her improved eating and sleeping patterns, even testimony from a school counselor who had seen the difference. But despite his powerful words, Marcus could feel the weight of the media storm pressing against them. Every time Jonathan sneered the word janitor, whispers flared in the gallery. Marcus's stomach churned. For once he felt powerless in a room. He wanted to rise, to shout the truth himself. But then, from the back of the courtroom, a small voice cut through the noise. May I say something? The room turned. Eva stood there, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. Her hands trembled, but her chin was lifted. Judge Collins tilted her head, sure and surprised. Eva, are you sure you want to speak? Eva nodded, her voice quiet but clear. Yes, Your Honor. I need to. She walked forward, her small shoes tapping against the floor. The silence was absolute as she stood before the bench. Her pale hair fell into her eyes, but when she lifted her head, her gaze was steady. Everyone says my dad isn't good enough, she began, her voice shaking, and that Miss Kesha doesn't belong with me, but they're wrong. My dad tries. He might not understand everything, but he's there. And Miss Kesha... Eva's voice cracked, but she pressed on. She's the only one who understands me. When I'm scared, she knows what to do. She makes me feel safe. Tears welled in Kesha's eyes, her hand pressed against her mouth. Eva turned then, her eyes narrowing as they met Spencer's. And you? I don't know you. You never cared about me. You left. So why do you want me now? The words hung in the air like thunder. Spencer's smug expression faltered, his face flushing with anger. But he said nothing. Eva clutched her sketchbook tighter. Miss Kesha isn't just someone who helps me. To me, she's my mom, and I can't lose her. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy with the weight of truth spoken by a child who had found her voice at last. Judge Collins's expression softened, though her tone remained firm. Thank you, Eva, she said gently. You've been very brave. After a long pause, she looked down at her notes, then back up at the room. Having considered all evidence, and most importantly the testimony of Eva Ward, the court hereby denies the petition of Mr. Spencer Ward. Custody shall remain with Marcus Ward. Furthermore, the court acknowledges the positive and vital role of Miss Kesha Hayes in Eva's life. Relief crashed over Marcus like a wave. He turned and pulled Eva into his arms, holding her tight, whispering, Thank you, sweetheart. I'll never let anyone take you away. Kesha wiped at her tears, her heart swelling as she watched father and Douse get her hold each other. For the first time, she truly believed they could weather anything together. But as Spencer stormed out of the courtroom, his face twisted with fury, Marcus knew this victory was only the beginning. Because outside those doors, Greg Stanton and the board were waiting, ready to turn this family triumph into the next weapon against him. The courthouse doors had barely swung shut behind Marcus before the world rushed back in. Reporters shouted his name, microphones shoved forward like weapons, cameras flashing in bursts that made Eva shrink against his side. Kesha tightened her arm protectively around the little girl, shielding her from the chaos. For one fragile moment, Marcus allowed himself to breathe. The judge's words still echoed in his chest. Custody shall remain with Marcus Ward. They had won. But the storm was far from over. By the time Marcus returned to Ward Corps' gleaming tower that evening, the boardroom was already filled. The directors sat in stiff silence, their expressions colder than the marble table beneath their hands. At the head of the long room stood Greg Stanton, his posture sharp, his eyes glittering with vindication. Marcus, Greg began, his voice carrying a smug authority, you've embarrassed this company enough. First the scandal with the cleaning woman, then today's circus in court, broadcast across every news outlet. Do you have any idea what you've done to our reputation? Marcus dropped Eva's drawing, creased but precious, onto the table. 3 figures, hand in hand beneath a sky of bubbles. His jaw tightened. I've done what any father should. I protected my daughter. Greg's laugh was bitter. At the expense of WardCorp, at the expense of every shareholder who trusted you. This company cannot afford your personal crusades, Marcus. We are bleeding credibility. The press is tearing us apart. And now you've made Miss Hayes a permanent fixture in your daughter's life? Publicly? That's not just reckless. That's corporate suicide. The board members shifted uneasily, murmurs rippling around the table. Marcus could feel their fear pressing against him, their loyalty slipping through his fingers. For years, he had commanded this room like a king. Now he was being cornered like a criminal. Greg's voice sharpened, slicing through the whispers. If you truly care about this company's future, Marcus, you'll step aside, resign. Let someone capable lead WardCorp back to stability. If you refuse, he paused, his eyes narrowing. Then we will call an emergency shareholders meeting to remove you. The choice is yours. The words hit Marcus like a blade, but this time he didn't flinch. He rose slowly, his tall frame casting a shadow across the room. For the first time, he allowed every emotion he had buried, rage, sorrow, love, to burn openly in his eyes. I've spent my life chasing numbers, titles, prestige, he said, his voice low but resonant. I built this empire brick by brick and I thought it made me powerful, but all it made me was hollow. And while I sat in this room counting profits, my daughter was slipping further away. He placed a hand firmly on the drawing. Kesha Hayes gave Eva something none of us could. Not the experts, not me, not any of you. She gave her trust. She gave her hope. And you want me to destroy that for stock prices, for headlines? Greg's face reddened. This is not about sentiment, it's about survival. No, Greg, Marcus said firmly, his voice rising. It's about humanity, about whether we are willing to throw away love for the sake of power. And I won't do it again. Not for you, not for this board, not for anyone. If it costs me my position, so be it. But I will not sacrifice my daughter or the woman who saved her, just to keep your approval. The room fell into stunned silence. The directors looked from one another to Marcus, unsettled by the fire in his words. Greg, however, leaned forward, his expression tight with fury. Then you leave us no choice, he hissed. The shareholders will decide your fate. I'll see to it personally. Marcus turned without another word. As he walked out, the heavy doors closing behind him, his pulse thundered. He had just declared war against the very empire he had built. But strangely, for the first time in years, he felt free. Later that night, in the quiet of Kesha's modest apartment, he told her everything. She listened, her eyes wide with both fear and pride. They'll try to strip everything from you, she whispered. Marcus reached across the table, taking her hand gently. Let them. I've already found what matters most. You, Eva, Becca. For once, I'm ready to lose the world if it means I finally gain a family. Kesha's breath caught, her eyes shimmering with tears. She had never seen him like this. Unarmored, resolute, human. In that moment, she knew the battles ahead would be brutal. But she also knew Marcus was no longer just a CEO. He was a father, and perhaps something more. And outside in the sleepless city, whispers of rebellion stirred. Greg Stanton had declared war, but Marcus Ward was finally ready to fight back, not with power, but with truth. The city buzzed with anticipation the morning Marcus Ward walked into the press conference hall. Word had spread like wildfire. The Billionaire CEO, embroiled in scandal, was about to make a statement. Reporters crammed shoulder to shoulder, cameras flashing, microphones tilted forward like hungry mouths waiting to devour his every word. The tension was electric, the kind that made people lean in closer, waiting for blood. Marcus stepped onto the stage, his black suit immaculate, but there was something different about him. Gone was the cold, untouchable aura that had once defined him. His posture was firm, but his eyes carried weight, Soothe, and a determination that unsettled those who expected him to cower. Behind him, at his side, stood Kesha Hayes, her presence quiet but resolute, and Eva, holding her sketchbook against her chest. For a moment, the entire room seemed to blink in disbelief. A janitor and a child standing where only polished executives once stood. The murmurs swelled, but Marcus silenced them with his first words. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice steady and clear. Today I'm not here as the CEO of WardCorp Biotech. I stand before you as a father. The room stilled. The weight in his tone left no room for mockery. He glanced briefly at Kesha, then at Eva, drawing strength from them both. My daughter has struggled for years with pain and silence that no amount of money could ease. I threw everything I had at the problem. Therapists, doctors, experts. And I failed. Because what she needed wasn't strategy or treatment. What she needed was someone to sit with her, to listen, to love her as she is. And the person who gave her that wasn't me. It wasn't anyone I paid. His voice softened, cracking just enough for the cameras to catch. It was Kesha Hayes. Gasps fluttered through the room. Marcus let the silence stretch, his gaze locking on the sea of lenses and skeptical faces. Yes, he continued firmly. Kesha is a janitor. She is not a doctor. She is not licensed. She is not part of the world of wealth and privilege that I've lived in all my life. But she is the only person who saw my daughter as more than a patient or a problem. She reached her with nothing more than sincerity, soap bubbles, and compassion. And in doing so, she taught me something I should have known all along, that love, not money, is what saves us. A few murmurs turned into stunned silence. The rawness of his words cut through the polished script reporters had expected. I know some of you think this makes me weak, Marcus went on, his voice rising with conviction. I know Greg Stanton and others are whispering that I've disgraced WardCorp, that I've endangered my daughter. But let me tell you what truly endangers her. A world where image and profit mean more than love and family. That world nearly destroyed her. I won't let it happen again. He paused, turning toward Kesha. For the first time, his public mask cracked completely. His hand reached for hers, and in front of the entire world, Marcus Ward did what no one expected. I love Kesha Hayes, he said simply, but with a force that made the words thunder. I love her with all my heart, and I will never allow anyone to insult her, to diminish her, or to tear her away from me or from Eva. If loving her costs me my position, my company, even my reputation, then so be it. I would rather lose everything than live another day without honoring the woman who saved my daughter and me. The room exploded. Some reporters leapt to their feet, shouting questions, their cameras firing like gunfire. Others simply stared, stunned by the sincerity pouring from a man known for his icy control. Kesha's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't known he would go this far, not in front of the cameras, not in front of the entire world. And yet, hearing him say it, seeing him choose her without hesitation, broke down walls she didn't even know she still held. Eva stepped forward timidly, tugging at her father's sleeve. She opened her sketchbook and held it up high, showing the world her simple drawing, the three of them hand in hand under a sky of pale blue bubbles. The cameras flashed wildly, capturing the fragile picture that spoke louder than 1,000 headlines. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the clicking of shutters. Then, slowly, applause began. Soft at first, then swelling into something undeniable. It wasn't unanimous. There were still skeptics, still critics, but the tide had shifted. Marcus's chest rose and fell as he choked. He stood taller, Kesha's hand in his, Eva pressed close to his side. He had just laid his entire life on the line in front of the world, and yet he had never felt lighter. And somewhere in the shadows of the crowd, Greg Stanton watched with a face carved from stone. Rage simmered in his eyes. Marcus had turned vulnerability into strength, and the public was responding. Greg's power was slipping, and he knew it. The war was far from over. But for the first time, Marcus had turned the battlefield in his favor. Not with money, but with truth. The applause from the press conference still echoed in Marcus's memory as he walked into WardCorp's boardroom days later. But here there was no applause, no warmth, only cold stares, sharper than glass, from the men and women who had once followed his every command. The long mahogany table gleamed under the fluorescent lights, polished to perfection, but the air in the room was jagged with hostility. At the far end, Greg Stanton sat like a spider at the center of a web, his suit immaculate, his smile razor-thin. He rose slowly, letting the weight of the silence stretch before speaking. Marcus, Greg began, his tone dripping with false civility. Your little performance before the press may have won over the public. But here, in this room, sentiment doesn't keep companies afloat. Your declaration of love for a cleaning woman has damaged WardCorp beyond repair. Our investors are spooked. Our partners are questioning our judgment. And our shareholders, he paused, savoring the moment. They're preparing to decide whether you remain in that chair. A ripple of whispers coursed around the table. Marcus stood at the head, tall and steady, but he could feel the tide pressing against him. For years, he had commanded this room with numbers, charts, and cold strategy. But that Marcus was gone. He placed his hands on the table, his gaze sweeping across the directors. You all think I've lost control, that I've thrown away stability for personal feelings, but let me ask you, what is stability worth if it dies? Troy's, the very people we claim to serve? Greg chuckled darkly. This isn't about people, Marcus. It's about profit, about trust. You've broken both. Marcus's voice cut through the murmurs, steady and resolute. No, Greg. You've forgotten what trust actually means. Trust isn't built in stock reports. It isn't bought with headlines. It's built in moments of truth. And for the first time in years, I've stopped lying. To myself, to my daughter, to the world. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and set it on the table. Eva's drawing, the three of them hand in hand beneath a sky of bubbles. The colors had faded slightly, the edges creased, but it was more powerful than any chart. He let it sit there, daring them to look. This, Marcus said quietly, is what matters. This is why I'll fight for WardCore, not because of titles or money, but because of the lives that depend on us. If we can't remember that, then this company is already dead, no matter what numbers you write on your balance sheets. For the first time, some of the directors faltered, their eyes softening, uncertain. But Greg pressed harder, his voice rising. Enough! Marcus Ward, you've turned a boardroom into a therapy session. You've traded discipline for drama, leadership for weakness. If you care so much about your family, then step down. Go play house with your janitor. Leave the real work to those who understand what leadership requires. Marcus straightened slowly, his presence filling the room. You're right about one thing, Greg. I have changed. I'm no longer the man who bows to image and greed. If that makes me unfit in your eyes, so be it, but I will not resign. He leaned forward, his gaze burning into Greg's. Call your shareholder meeting. Rally your whispers. Spread your poison. I'll stand in front of every single one of them and tell the truth. And if they strip me of this position, and so be it. I'd rather walk away with integrity than stay chained to lies. The room fell into stunned silence. Greg's face flushed crimson, his fists clenching at his sides. He had expected Marcus to beg, to bargain, to collapse under the weight of pressure. Instead, Marcus had turned defiance into strength. Finally, Greg spat the words through gritted teeth. Very well, the shareholders will decide, and when they do, you'll regret this. Marcus gathered Eva's drawing, folding it carefully and slipping it back into his jacket. He turned for the door, his voice calm, but heavy with finality. I've regretted many things in my life, Greg, but standing for my daughter and Kesha will never be one of them. He walked out, leaving the board in stunned silence, Greg fuming at the head of the table. Later that night, in the quiet of Kesha's apartment, Marcus recounted the confrontation. She listened in silence, her hand resting gently over his. You could lose everything, she whispered. Marcus looked at her, then at Eva asleep on the couch with Becca curled beside her. For the first time, his answer was simple. No, I've already gained everything. But as dawn crept over the skyline, Marcus knew Greg wasn't finished. The emergency shareholders meeting loomed like a storm on the horizon. The final battle for WardCore, and for everything Marcus and Kesha had built together, was coming. The day of the shareholders' meeting dawned gray, the sky heavy with clouds that pressed low over the city skyline. WardCore's glass tower gleamed coldly in the early light, its mirrored surface reflecting a storm that seemed to gather both outside and inside the grand auditorium. Hundreds of seats filled with the faces of shareholders, journalists, analysts, and executives. The buzz of whispered conversations was constant, sharp with speculation. At the center of it all, a long, polished stage stood waiting, two microphones gleaming beneath the harsh lights. On one side sat the board members, the IR expressions rigid, and in the front row, Greg Stanton leaned back in his chair, confidence radiating from him like poison. When Marcus Ward stepped onto the stage, the air shifted. He wore a simple black suit, his tie loose, his posture straight. But it was his eyes that held the room, clear, fierce, stripped of the icy detachment that once defined him. At his side, seated quietly, was Kesha Hayes, and behind them, in the care of an assistant, Eva clutched her sketchbook, her small face watching the crowd with nervous bravery. Greg rose first, striding to the microphone, his voice sharp and commanding. Ladies and gentlemen, shareholders of WardCore, we are gathered today because Marcus Ward has failed us. He has allowed personal weakness to dictate leadership. He has exposed this company to scandal, ridicule, and instability, and now he flaunts his recklessness by parading a cleaning woman as part of his inner circle. If Marcus refuses to step aside, then for the good of WardCore, we must vote to remove him. A murmur of agreement swept the room, fueled by fear and greed. Greg's eyes glinted. He believed he had already won. Marcus approached the other microphone, his voice calm but firm. For years, I believed, as Greg does, that reputation, money, and power were everything. I sacrificed my time, my heart, even my daughter's trust on that altar. And what did it bring? A company that values profit over people, prestige over purpose. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the room. Then one day, a janitor, someone you would all overlook, sat on the floor of my lobby and blew soap bubbles for my daughter. And for the first time in years, Eva smiled. For the first time, she trusted. Not because of expertise, not because of money, but because someone cared. The room shifted, uneasy. Marcus pressed on. Yes, Kesha Hayes is a janitor, but she is also the only person who gave my daughter what she needed most, love. And she taught me that leadership isn't measured in quarterly profits. It's measured in courage, in sincerity, in whether you are willing to risk everything for what truly matters. Greg barked a laugh, cutting through the tension. Touching speech, Marcus, but we are not here for sentiment. We are here for results. Soap bubbles and drawings don't save companies. Strong leadership does. Marcus's hand slipped into his jacket. Slowly, he pulled out Eva's drawing, worn at the edges but still bright, the three of them hand in hand beneath a sky of pale blue bubbles. He held it up high, letting the cameras capture every detail. This, he said, his voice ringing out, is my result. This is the proof that sincerity changes lives. This is what I fight for. If you want a leader who only counts dollars, then remove me. But if you want a leader who will rebuild WardCore on truth, humanity, and real trust, then stand with me now. The silence was electric. Then, from the back, applause began. It spread slowly at first, then swelled like a wave. Shareholders rose, clapping, some with tears in their eyes. The tide had turned. Greg's face went pale, fury twisting his features. He stepped forward, desperate. Don't be fooled. This is a trick. But he was cut off by a voice from the crowd. Enough, Stanton. Another shareholder rose, his voice firm. We've seen what you stand for, and we've seen what Marcus stands for. I choose him. Others echoed the sentiment, louder, stronger. The room erupted in applause as the vote was cast and recorded. The result was clear. Marcus would remain CEO. Greg Stanton's coup had failed. Security moved toward Greg, who stood trembling with rage. You'll regret this, Marcus, he spat, his voice breaking. You'll regret all of it. Marcus stepped closer, his voice quiet but sharp as a blade. No, Greg. For the first time, I won't. The room roared with approval as Greg was escorted out, his empire of fear collapsing. Around him. Marcus turned back to the crowd, but his eyes sought only one face. Kesha sat at the edge of the stage, her eyes glistening with tears, her expression a mix of awe and pride. He walked to her, reached for her hand, and pulled her to her feet. Kesha, he said, his voice low but clear enough for the microphones to carry. You are not my scandal. You are my strength, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it. Kesha's breath caught, and for the first time in front of the world, she let her heart answer. Marcus, we already know the truth. You just had to be brave enough to say it. Eva ran forward then, sketchbook in hand, throwing her arms around both of them. The cameras flashed, capturing the image. A billionaire, a janitor, and a child, united not by wealth or power but by love. It was the final shocking reveal the world hadn't expected, that the strongest empire Marcus Ward would ever build wasn't WardCore Biotech. It was the family standing beside him,